It should have been my first clue. By the end of the weekend, Wendy had more pictures taken with her previous in-laws Ed and Joe Parmley than with anyone else, including me and my own parents. What bothered me the most were the photos of her with them while holding a picture of her first husband, Kevin. When I mention her, I'm referring to my lovely bride, Wendy, and when I mention him, I mean Kevin. The pictures I'm talking about were all taken on what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, Wendy and my wedding day. Kevin and Wendy were the typical high school sweethearts who stayed together through college at BG State University and eventually married. They had what many would call a storybook marriage, a love that grew deeper daily, making them the envy of everyone they knew. Kevin was the epitome of the all-American boy, excelling in everything he did from sports to academics. He was a star athlete at Red River Falls High School and continued to shine at BG State, where he became known as a formidable player on the hockey team. Wendy, too, was the all-American girl, athletic and talented, serving as a cheerleader and later becoming a standout goalie on the women's hockey team. Together, they were adored by their community. Kevin graduated with a degree in business administration and returned home to work as a personal banker, while Wendy taught Spanish and English as a second language at the local community college. They were a beloved couple, the kind everyone aspired to be. However, life can be unpredictable. Wendy and Kevin had been married for a little over 2 years when Kevin began experiencing a series of health problems. It started with a string of colds and infections that took a long time to resolve, requiring various medications. Each time it seemed he was recovering, another illness would hit, leaving him down for even longer. It was puzzling how someone in excellent health like Kevin could suddenly become so vulnerable. Finally, his physician ordered hospitalization and a series of tests to find the cause. Physically, Kevin appeared almost unchanged. He hadn't lost much weight or muscle, but he couldn't seem to stay well. The doctors at Holy Family Medical Center delivered the devastating diagnosis: pancreatic cancer. This type of cancer can often mask itself, allowing a person to appear healthy while causing severe internal distress. By the time symptoms emerged, it was often advanced and had begun to spread. A PET scan revealed the extent of the disease: cancerous spots on his brain, lungs, liver, spine, and kidneys. This was discovered before Kevin could even begin chemotherapy. He was quickly transferred to the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, where his condition stabilized for a brief period. However, after completing his chemotherapy, a new PET scan showed cancer had spread to his lymph nodes and bone marrow. Despite the best care available, Kevin's health continued to decline, and he passed away just 3 days before their 3rd wedding anniversary. Wendy was utterly devastated. The loss of their shared dreams and aspirations felt akin to the grief of losing a child. She later reflected that when she saw Kevin in his casket, she didn't just see him, she saw the potential lives and legacies that would never come to be because he was gone. Thoughts of the children and grandchildren they would never have deepened her pain, making it feel insurmountable. It took her 6 months to feel ready to return to work, and another 6 before she began to resemble the person she was before Kevin's illness. Counseling and grief therapy helped her navigate the worst of her sorrow, but she often cried herself to sleep, holding a picture of Kevin close. Ed and Joe Parmley, Kevin's parents, were equally heartbroken by the loss of their eldest son. Despite having 4 other wonderful children, Greg, Bobby, Melinda, and Nate, they struggled to cope with the death of their favorite son. They continued to shower Wendy with love and support, inviting her to family gatherings and treating her as an honored guest. Ed Parmley did everything he could to keep Kevin's spirit alive within the family. He often reminisced about Kevin's sports achievements, his dreams for the future with Wendy, and the promising businessman Kevin was becoming. Over time, there were whispers that the other Parmley children resented their parents, especially Ed, for romanticizing Kevin's life while seemingly overlooking their own. The depth of their pain suggested they struggled to appreciate the joys and gifts present in their family. Greg and Bobby, who were only a year apart, seemed like the best of friends. They likely found comfort in their brotherhood, filling the emotional void created by their parents' focus on Kevin. Despite this, they idolized their older brother and contributed to the idealized image that surrounded him. Even in death, Kevin seemed to grow larger in memory than he was in life. Melinda, their only daughter, was a striking beauty, contrasting with her brothers, who were all athletes. She possessed a graceful demeanor reminiscent of pageant queens, while the youngest son, Nate, embraced an urban cowboy style. Nate loved wearing Western clothing, flannel shirts, fitted jeans, and his favorite well-worn boots. Despite his fashion choices, he was the auditorium and stage manager at Red River Falls Community College, having earned a fine arts degree with an emphasis in theater from Macalester College in the Twin Cities. Looking back on the day of my wedding, I realized there were signs I overlooked, ominous hints of the challenges that lay ahead. While it may not be possible to be overshadowed by a deceased person, my experience felt strikingly close to that. My name is Jack Fitzgerald, and I was a lieutenant with the Red River Falls Fire Department when I married Wendy Parmley. My aspiration to become a firefighter began in kindergarten during a fire station tour for Fire Prevention Week. I graduated from Red River Falls High School about 7 years before Wendy and Kevin. My path led me to St. Cloud State University, where I earned a degree in Public Safety Administration with a double major in fire science. I also became certified as a nationally registered EMT paramedic. After graduating, I passed the written and physical tests for the Red River Falls Fire Department, ranking first on the list of qualified candidates. I was offered a position as a probationary firefighter when the next opening became available. Red River Falls Community College had recently launched an associate degree program in fire science, and I served as lead instructor for the course on international building and fire codes. It was while teaching that class that I met Wendy Parmley. I was immediately struck by her flame-red hair, captivating aquamarine eyes, and the multitude of freckles that adorned her face and arms. I've always been a sucker for freckles. Though Wendy didn't smile often, when she did, it felt like the sun breaking through the clouds. She was tall, around 5 feet 9 inches, with a trim and athletic build. I felt hesitant about asking her out, especially after an English instructor at RFCC had shared some details about Wendy's past and what had happened to her husband. The thought of her enduring the pain of widowhood at such a young age weighed heavily on me. I saw her nearly every day at the college, and one day we actually made eye contact. I offered her a smile and a wave, and to my delight she returned both. No words were spoken, but I felt like I was on cloud 9 for days afterward. Suddenly Wendy filled my thoughts, and I couldn't shake her from my mind. We often passed each other in the hall, exchanging smiles and waves from a distance. Knowing about her past, I decided against a direct approach. I feared I would get shot down immediately. Fortunately, I didn't have to worry about that. I didn't usually eat at college cafeteria, but one day I was pressed for time. My teaching schedule often conflicted with my shifts at the fire department, so I had to rush. To my surprise, Wendy made the first move and sat down across from me while I was eating. She reached across the table and offered her hand. "Hi, I'm Wendy Parmley." I gingerly shook her hand, a bit flustered as I had just taken a bite of food. "I see you in passing all the time, but we've never had a chance to meet." "I'm Jack Fitzgerald," I said after swallowing, relieved I hadn't choked. We exchanged pleasantries and engaged in polite conversation while finishing our lunch. I was so captivated that, before I knew it, nearly 2 hours had passed, and I was late getting back to the fire station. I knew my captain would be upset, but I didn't care. Wendy and I had exchanged phone numbers and promised to meet up for coffee soon. We took things slowly, with most of our early dates in public places like the mall, the museum, various restaurants, and enjoying bike rides and hikes. Wendy often opened up about Kevin, and I would listen as she expressed her frustrations about the life she had dreamed of with him. After nearly 4 months of casual dating, Wendy finally let me kiss her. After a lovely evening of dinner and a movie, I walked Wendy up to the front of the small bungalow she and Kevin had bought as their starter home. Holding her hands in mine, I leaned in for a gentle, heartfelt goodnight kiss. I promised myself that I wouldn't think about a physical relationship with Wendy until she was ready, and I was prepared to wait until we were married if I was fortunate enough to reach that point. Wendy and I had been dating for nearly a year before either of us broached the topic of marriage. I started the conversation by asking if she could see herself getting married again. To my surprise, she said yes and added that she could envision a future with me. My heart soared at those words, and from that moment on, our relationship began to deepen. Although Wendy still spoke often about Kevin and her past life with him, the conversation shifted. Instead of overwhelming sadness, she seemed able to think of him with a smile, embracing her identity as a young, vibrant woman with a future ahead of her. We continued dating for another 6 months, and after 3.5 years since Kevin's passing, I felt ready to pop the question. I asked her to marry me at one of our favorite parks overlooking the Red River Valley. To my immense happiness, she said yes. However, shortly after agreeing, Wendy had a couple of requests. She wanted me to formally ask her father, Mike, for her hand in marriage, and to seek the blessing of Kevin's parents, Ed and Joanne. Asking Wendy's father for permission was straightforward. I had gotten along well with her parents, Mike and Christy, when I first met them. However, my relationship with Ed and Joanne was much more strained. They were cool and distant, clearly viewing me as an interloper and potentially the man who might erase the life Wendy had shared with Kevin. I had shared that it was certainly not my intention in any way. I did my best to ingratiate myself with them, but they were cordial, albeit reluctantly. They did little to get to know me at the various social functions, whether at Mike and Christie's house or at the Parmley gatherings, to which Wendy was always invited. I seemed to get along okay with Greg, Bobby, and Melinda, but Nate, the youngest of the Parmley clan, was the most difficult to read. He always looked at me with a goofy smirk, as if he were in on a joke that everyone else was telling behind my back. I sensed that Ed and Joe Parmley hoped Nate would somehow sweep Wendy off her feet and restore her place in the family. When I showed up that fateful night at the Parmley house to ask for their blessing for Wendy and me, Ed looked as though someone had just delivered shocking news. Neither Ed nor Joe spoke at first, leaving an uncomfortable silence. Ed rose slowly from his chair and went upstairs, closing the door behind him. Joan tried to compose herself and simply said, "It's nothing against you, Jack. You seem like a nice man. We just want what's best for Wendy." I had no idea how to take her response. The next day when I saw Wendy, she asked how it went. I struggled to find the right words and finally said, "Ed and Joe just want you to be happy." It wasn't exactly a lie, but Wendy was ecstatic. That led to our wedding day, which should have been the happiest of my life. We followed tradition, and didn't take pictures until after the ceremony. I should have sensed something was off from all the pictures Wendy had taken with Ed and Joan. Ed was even in a tuxedo, almost like he was the father of the bride, which felt unusual. Mike and Christy, her parents, didn't seem to mind at all, and I quickly felt like a third wheel at my own wedding. The first dance with Wendy was amazing. It felt like our bodies could melt into each other, and for a few moments it felt like we were alone. Soon, the father-daughter dance came along, and Wendy danced with Mike while I shared a dance with my wonderful mother, Sandra. My father, Jim, beamed with pride from his seat and was to share the next dance with Wendy. But I couldn't believe it when it was announced that Wendy would share a very special dance only with Ed Parmley. I felt embarrassed watching my new bride dance with the father of her deceased first husband, and I also felt guilty for feeling that way. As Ed and Wendy danced, they seemed to share an intimate moment, both with tears in their eyes. Over the next 3 hours I managed to dance with my bride twice, but both times Ed cut in. I reluctantly let him, not wanting to make a scene at my own wedding. Finally, the reception came to an end, and Wendy and I retreated to our private suite for the night. I was incredibly nervous, knowing we were about to consummate our marriage and truly express our love for one another. It felt like a chance to leave behind all the frustrations of the wedding and reception. Wendy emerged from the bathroom dressed in a stunning white teddy that highlighted her beauty. I had never experienced such a strong reaction to anyone before, but the sight before me was captivating. Her vibrant red hair cascaded down her back and shoulders, and though she tried to appear confident, it was clear we were both feeling the same mix of excitement and nerves. She took my hand and led me to the bed. I was dressed only in boxers, and I initially wanted to keep the bedside lamps on to see the woman I was with for the first time. However, Wendy insisted on turning off the lights. We didn't waste much time, our kisses were deep and passionate, and soon she guided me onto my back as she took the lead. Everything felt sudden, but I hoped it would be just the first of many intimate moments we would share that night. In the dim light I could barely make out her form, but my imagination filled in the gaps. I focused on pleasing my new wife, determined not to rush things. "Oh my God, you're so amazing. I love the way you make me feel," she said, and I paused in surprise, nearly out of breath from both shock and desire. "What's the matter, babe? Why did you stop?" she asked, eager to continue. Did you just call me Kevin? I stuttered, confused. Why would you? No. Why would I do that? I reached over and turned on the light. Wendy's face glistened with a light sheen of sweat. Yes, you did. Is that why you wanted to keep the lights off so you could think of Kevin while we were? God, no. Why would you think that? And why would you stop? She replied, frustrated. I was almost there, Jack. Jesus, you just did it again, I said, feeling even more confused. I didn't call you Kevin. I know who I'm with now, Jack, she reassured me, rolling over to lay beside me. Thanks for ruining our moment. She was clearly upset, and I felt a wave of guilt. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I know what I heard. Maybe you didn't mean to say it, but it bothered me. I want to be first in your life. You are, Jack. You really are. I'm not sure why you thought I said Kevin, but I understand why it would upset you. She turned toward me and snuggled close. It had been a really long week leading up to today, and an incredibly stressful day for both of us. Maybe we should grab a little sleep first and pick up where we left off in a few hours. Nothing better than a gentle wake up, right? She kissed me softly and I smiled at her. I reached down, put my boxers back on, suddenly feeling a bit shy about the moment. I turned towards Wendy, spooned her and turned out the light. That night, I didn't get woken up as I had hoped, and I got very little sleep as my mind replayed the event over and over. I felt a sense of embarrassment knowing that I couldn't even finish making love to my wife for the first time. Worse yet, despite her reassurances, I couldn't shake the feeling that she might be thinking of her late husband instead. Wendy and I didn't have much time for a honeymoon. We decided to hold off on a trip until the end of summer when our schedules allowed it. The week following our wedding was busy with me moving out of my 2-bedroom apartment and into Wendy's home. In hindsight, one of the major mistakes I made was agreeing to move into the house she had shared with Kevin. Wendy had presented convincing arguments, even making a list of pros and cons. From the moment I moved in, I felt like a stranger. During our dating period, I hadn't spent much time there, and all the furniture was what they had chosen together, even the bed in the master bedroom. I tried to persuade Wendy to get new furniture and decorate the house in a way that reflected who we were as a couple, or at least who I believed we were. Wendy repeatedly mentioned how much she and Kevin had invested in their furniture and belongings, arguing that it didn't make sense to spend so much on new items. She also pointed out that my salary as a firefighter was not as high as Kevin's had been as a personal banker. To my discredit, I went along with it, holding my tongue and keeping the peace because I loved and adored Wendy. A few awkward days passed after our wedding before we attempted to make love again. This time it was slow and loving, and I felt like I was finally forging the emotional and physical connection with Wendy that I had longed for. She put in a noticeable effort, and thankfully, no names of previous partners were mentioned during our time together. However, I sensed that Wendy seemed more focused on the act itself, not from genuine arousal, but out of determination to avoid a repeat of our wedding night. I realized that Wendy didn't reach in pleasure that second time, likely because she was concentrating so hard on making things right for me. On one hand, I appreciated her effort, but on the other I couldn't shake the feeling that it was pity sex, a silent apology for what had happened. I knew deep down that she was aware of a name she had called out that night, and her attempts to make up for it without discussing it only added to my unease. Exactly 1 week after our wedding, we were invited to a barbecue at Ed and Joanne's house. The whole Parm family was going to be there, including Greg, Bobby, Melinda, and Nate, along with their children. I really didn't want to go, but I knew I wouldn't win an argument against it. So, as usual, I kept my thoughts to myself, carried the pistachio salad Wendy had made, and did my best to act like a gracious guest. Ed and Joanne greeted Wendy with warm hugs and kisses. Ed turned his back to check on the grill, which seemed to demand his full attention at that moment. I reached for Joan's hand, shook it gently and said thank you for having us. Joan gave me a weak smile before walking to the backyard, arm in arm with Wendy, as they engaged in an animated conversation. Once in the backyard, I received a half-hearted greeting from Greg, who was just a bit younger than Kevin. Hey Jack, he said, extending his hand. Glad you and Wendy could make it. Can I get you a beverage or something? Sure. Do you have Coors Light or Bud Light? Take your pick, he replied. Bud Light would be perfect. Greg handed me a bottle, and I awkwardly stood by, listening to an animated discussion between Greg and Bobby about the grain market, something I knew absolutely nothing about. Both worked in agricultural sales, with Greg being an up-and-coming salesman for John Deere and Bobby a seed dealer for Monsanto. Their conversation was likely important, but I excused myself from their company, which neither seemed to notice. Wandering the backyard, I watched the kids playing on the trampoline and swing set. At some point, I felt a bit out of place standing there with a cold drink in hand, so I made my way back to the patio where the rest of the adults were seated. When the burgers were finished, Ed called everyone to the table. To my dismay, there were only enough seats for Ed, Joanne, Wendy, Greg and his wife Samantha, Bobby and his wife Tabitha, Melinda and her fiancé Reese, and Nate. Embarrassingly, I was invited to sit with the 4 kids at the picnic table. Nate kept glancing at me with a goofy smirk, making me feel a bit awkward. I laid off the beer for the rest of the afternoon since I couldn't seem to engage with the adults in conversation. Instead, I happily accepted an offer from Greg and Bobby's kids to join them on the trampoline and push them on the swings. We even roughhoused a little and played tag and kickball in the expansive backyard. The last 3 hours of the gathering flew by, with the little kids doing their best to wear me out. As Wendy was hugging everyone and saying our goodbyes, Greg's little boy Tyler came up to me, asking to be picked up. He was an adorable 3-year-old with a mop of dirty blonde hair. "Thanks for playing with us, Uncle Jack," he said. "You're welcome. I had a lot of fun." Suddenly Greg chimed in, "What did he just call you? Did he tell you to call him that?" There was a stunned silence around us. "Jesus, Dad," Greg said in an exaggerated whisper. "Take it easy, he doesn't know the difference." Ed shot Greg an annoyed look before turning to me and Tyler. "Jack is your friend, Tyler, and he's Wendy's husband, but he's not your uncle." Confused, little Tyler asked, "Does that mean Wendy isn't my aunt anymore?" "No, Aunt Wendy will always be your aunt," Ed replied, glaring at me. "But Jack will never be your uncle." With that he turned and went inside, leaving everyone around us staring in horror. Even Nate, who had been smirking all afternoon, looked away in embarrassment. I patted little Tyler on the back, thanked him again for playing, and handed him back to his father. "Come on, Jack," Wendy beckoned. "I think we should just grab our stuff and go." Wendy and the remaining Parley clan exchanged hugs again. It seemed like some of them wanted to say something to me, but nobody found the words or the courage, too wary of Ed's presence. Wendy and I rode in silence for most of the way home. Finally, as we neared the house, she spoke up. "Ed Parley is an amazing man and an incredible father. Jack, you just need to give him time to warm up to you. He doesn't know you like I do. He'll come around, you'll see, I promise." I pulled my 2012 King Ranch Ford F-250 into the driveway and said nothing. Wendy squeezed my hand reassuringly before exiting the truck. As I walked into the house, the whole embarrassing afternoon replayed in my mind, and the feeling of being a stranger in what was supposed to be my home with Wendy washed over me. I realized that the only meaningful things I brought with me were my stereo and my clothes. Wendy and I had decided that none of the furniture from my apartment matched the decor of the house, so it was all sitting in a rented storage unit. I longed to just sit back and relax while watching a ball game in my old recliner. It was only a year old, but it had built-in cup holders, a remote holder so it never got lost, and headphone jacks for listening to music or TV. The basement of Wendy's house was completely finished and was initially meant to house a workout room. I decided it was time to create a man cave. I had to work a 24-hour shift at the fire station the day after the incident at Ed and Joan's house, so first thing Monday morning, I drove my truck over to the storage unit and retrieved my 60-inch plasma TV, my theater-style wraparound sectional sofa, and my trusty recliner. I also picked up a foosball table and a pre-owned 8-foot pool table with some help from my fellow firefighters. Wendy was teaching summer courses that day and had meetings at Red River Falls Community College. By the time she arrived home that night, my little project was ready. I thought about calling it the Jack Cave, but realized that sounded a bit silly. I promised myself I would think of a better name. I also hung up all my Minnesota Vikings and Minnesota Twins posters and paraphernalia. While I'm not huge into college sports, I did buy and display some Boise State items too. Wendy came home around 4 p.m. and was surprised to see my friends there, but even more shocked by what we had done with the basement. She didn't say much at first, just taking in the sight of the guys playing pool and foosball while we watched a replay of last night's Twins game on the plasma TV. When I showed her the Boise State pennants and logos alongside the Vikings and Twins gear, she smiled politely, but after a moment she covered her mouth and walked back upstairs. I wasn't sure what to make of it, but I thought she might be trying to hold back tears. My fellow firefighters noticed too. "Party's over, guys," I said. My friends slowly filed out, and I thanked each of them as they left. Once they were gone, I trudged back into the house, feeling uneasy. I found Wendy in the kitchen, eating a banana while reading the newspaper, clearly trying to avoid looking at me. Finally, she spoke. "I see you decided to decorate the basement without me." "Look, Wendy, I can explain." "Can you?" "I thought we agreed to keep the house the way it was." "Sweetheart, I didn't change anything significant. The space was empty and the upstairs is just as it was. I just needed a little space of my own." "But you didn't even talk to me about it, Jack. You went ahead and did whatever you wanted. You never asked if I had plans for the downstairs. Do you have any idea how disrespected I feel right now? This has been my home for almost 6 years. You've only been here a week and you take over an entire floor without asking. I thought this was my home too." "Well, it is, but that doesn't mean you can make decisions like this on your own. Jack, I had a lot of my old things and some of them are sentimental to me. You have everything in this house that you brought before we got married. Until today, I had absolutely nothing of my own here. I just wanted a few of my things. I wish you could understand that. And I wish you could understand how upset you've made me," she said, getting up from the table and heading for the bedroom. She closed the door behind her, and I didn't take that as an invitation for further discussion. An hour passed and I finally got hungry, deciding to make some supper. Even though it was summer, I whipped up a quick batch of spaghetti, garlic bread and a tossed salad. I mustered up the courage to knock on the bedroom door. "You can come in," she said dryly. She was lying on the bed, reading a book. Wendy is a huge Isaac Asimov fan and has read all his books at least twice. "I made some supper if you want to eat with me, just spaghetti, bread and salad." "I thought you might be hungry." Wendy looked up, put her book aside, and quietly walked to the kitchen. She grabbed a plate, filled it with a generous portion of spaghetti, took a couple of pieces of bread and a bowl of salad. Managing not to spill anything, she deftly carried the whole ensemble back to the bedroom, closing the door with her foot. The message was clear: I would be dining alone tonight. I felt crushed. I had acted that way because I felt like an outsider in this house, which I was. It just hadn't clicked for me yet. I ate my meal in silence, realizing Wendy wouldn't forgive me anytime soon. After cleaning up the dishes and putting away the leftovers, I knocked on the bedroom door around 9 o'clock. When Wendy didn't answer, I carefully crept in. She had stacked her dishes on the nightstand and was already in bed, fast asleep. It was evident she had cried herself to sleep. I took the dishes and cleaned them up, and after watching the end of David Letterman, I decided to call it a night. I grabbed a blanket and a spare pillow from the linen closet and made my way downstairs to sleep in the man cave, the source of my pain. Less than 2 weeks into marriage and I was already on the couch. The next morning I got up early, deciding it was a good day to get back into my distance running. I was gone for almost 2 hours, probably longer than I should have run since it had been a while. But being out and about gave me a chance to clear my head. When I got back it was only 7:30, but to my dismay, Wendy had already left for work. She had written a note and left it on the table: "Babe, left for work early for a meeting. We need to talk and get something settled. I'll be home mid-afternoon." As the day went on, I braced myself for the fact that she might insist on the man cave disappearing, the one area of the house I could somewhat call my own, where I didn't feel like I was being watched constantly. True to her word, Wendy came home right at 2:30. She changed out of her teaching attire into a light sundress, and I had to admit she looked amazing. If it hadn't been for her anger toward me, I would have